My brothers and sisters, the Lord is with you.
And also with you.
We continue listening to God speak to us from the Gospel in the tradition of John.
Glory
to you, Lord.
Since it was Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he found those who were selling oxen, sheep, and doves, as well as the money changers seated there. He made a whip out of cords and drove them all out of the temple area with the sheep and the oxen, and spilled the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he said to them, "Get out of here and stop making God's house into a marketplace." The disciples recalled the words of Scripture, "Zeal for your house will consume me." At this the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The reply was, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Therefore, when he was raised from the dead, the disciples remembered what he had said, and they came to believe the Scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. While he was in Jerusalem for the Passover, many came to believe in his name when they saw the signs he was doing. But he would not trust himself to them, because he knew them all well. He did not need anyone to testify about human nature. He understood it well himself. And this is the gospel, the good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus
By
Christ.
the words of the gospel, may our sins be blotted out.
Amen.
Amen. So we gather, and as always, we thank God we can be here to pray together and to hear God's word in the Scriptures. As I just finished reading, whatever thoughts I had, I've got to start with something other than what's here. Sometimes I think we forget when we hear about this Jewish carpenter. Sometimes I think we forget that he was also one of us. That he understood what it meant, what it means to be a human being. He understood it well himself. And, you know, as the second reading said, one group thought the belief in Jesus was one thing, another group felt another. But because of Jesus knowing what it means to be of flesh and blood, of God coming to be with us, that's what makes our belief system so incredibly awesome. We're not talking about an individual, we're not talking about a characteristic of a person who doesn't know, who couldn't relate to us. Of course, the Scripture says to us very simply, Jesus was like us in everything but sin. Okay? So he knew what it meant to be happy. We saw it at the wedding feast of Cana. He knew what it meant to be troubled. He knew what it meant to encounter God. If you remember last week, the Scripture spoke to us about Jesus being transfigured, about Jesus hearing God speak to him, about Jesus being called God's beloved. And it's not the first time that Jesus hears these words. He also heard them at his baptism, that he is God's beloved. And he's not the only one. Each one of us is God's beloved. Because within us is that special gift we receive at baptism. And in order for that gift of baptism to continue within us, we have to believe that God is within us in a very special way. This is vital. Jesus, God's beloved. And one of the things that the scripture tells us is that after that particular incident of the transfiguration, Jesus, one scripture says, he's pointed towards Jerusalem. Another version says he's on his way to Jerusalem. Okay? And knowing that this last journey was not going to be something simple, he needs to have that assurance that God is with him. I like to say that God gave him a pat on the back. Okay? Don't worry. You're going to go through hell, but I'm going to be there with you. And that's what we have to remember too, is that no matter what happens in our lives, the good and the bad, that God's presence is with us in a very special way. So when Jesus goes to Jerusalem, and it's the festival of Passover, and there's all sorts of revelry and people coming from many, many miles. And then he goes into the temple, and we hear. We hear what transpires. Jesus gets annoyed. We could use another word, but it's not really appropriate in church. You know what I'm talking about, okay? And we see a very different Jesus. We don't see the Jesus who heals. We don't see the Jesus who embraced the leper. We see a Jesus who is justifiably angry. Now, those of you who've had children, Jane, Doreen, if your son or daughter ran out in the traffic and you got angry, that's called justifiable anger. And this is what we see with Jesus. You're making God's house into a marketplace, the temple. But he was also talking about another temple, right? The temple that we carry with us, God's house. And what we're asked to do is to take care of that temple as best as we can. Healthy of mind, body, and spirit. That's what we're asked to be. Okay? And it's vital that we are the temple. And how do we care for the temple? Do we just nourish the temple on weekends? Or do we spend time every day in God's presence? Is the temple something that we only occasionally think about? Or do we realize the presence of God is with us 24/7, 365? And sometimes we forget. It's only human. And Jesus knew this. He realized, because he's one of us. It's just an incredible manner in which we can experience the presence of Jesus every day in our lives. But we have to be open to letting God in, right? To letting the selfishness out. Vital. And caring for the temple, my brothers and sisters, means also thinking about how we support the temple itself. Think about it. I did a little bit of research, and for what it's worth, I'll pass it along to you. It suggested that when people make a donation to a faith community, that it's about what you would spend for a meal in a good restaurant. McDonald's isn't a good restaurant. Think about it. Pray about it. The justice of God lives with us, and the temple is ours. may we always care for the temple, because the temple is God's presence. Pray for me as I pray for you. And may God bless us and keep us. May God's face shine upon us, give us peace, now and always.
Amen.